Welcome to the Near Memo, a weekly conversation about search, social, and commerce. What happened, why it matters, and the implications for local. All right, Mike, I can see you're chomping at the bit to talk about Benedict Evans' article on e-commerce and why that the debate between e-commerce and traditional retail may be a silly thing and not meaningful anymore.
Before we get there, I have to wonder what the origin of chomping at the bit as it refers to a human. It sort of implies that you somehow have me in a subsidiary position with a bit in my mouth, constraining it. And I would contend my mouth is rarely constrained by anybody.
Yes. All right. The unrestrained Mike Blumenthal.
So
Unchained, Mike Blumenthal Unchained. That could be your one-man show.
There you go. During early in the pandemic, there was viral and frequent conversation about how e-commerce as a percentage of retail related to retail had gone up 5 years. And we were all excited that this
was 10,
and it had leaped forward. And then in the past 6 months, the counter conversation has dropped back to earth. Benedict Evans did an interesting analysis of that because he points out that this is e-commerce as a percentage of relationship to addressable retail, one, and what is addressable retail, and two, it's not about absolute, it's about relative comparison of the size of the two markets. So first, let me address the second one. He pointed out that e-commerce has continued at this higher pace, but over this last 6 months, particularly in the United States, bricks and mortar retail has made a huge resurgence. Some of that is a rebound effect and may settle out differently than we're seeing now. So the ratio between the two may be affected. But also it's a ratio, it's not absolute. And that the real question is, what are we comparing it to? This question of addressable retail, which, as you pointed out in the initial talk, it originally didn't include all retail that wasn't saleable on the internet, I guess, right? So,
right. Cars was an example.
Cars is an example. Car parts, car
and
repair,
real estate.
Right.
Well, real estate isn't part of that,
right?
But yeah,
it's not part of it, right? But the reality is that addressable market has dramatically changed because cars now are sold online and picked up in store, for example, Carvana or one of these other companies, or Tesla as an example. And food, which was 50% delivery prior to, was not included in the addressable market. And really, he points out what's the difference between getting it via DoorDash or getting it via a bicycle delivery pre-internet. It's the same thing. So the real question is the chart meaningful? And the answer to that is it probably isn't as it's presented. The question really should be, what is retail as a whole? And it's all going to include different aspects of e-commerce in real life. And he suggested that maybe a better way to think about e-commerce or retail was just how the products were delivered rather than how they were purchased, right? That most products sooner or later are going to have some internet component to them. So it's kind of a specious way of looking at it. So there was that. And I just thought it's important to not make decisions based on the idea that all of a sudden e-commerce has ground to a halt. It hasn't. It's growing as fast as it was before and at a new higher level. So, for example, the Spotify decision to cut back and lay people off, he used the chart, I think, in his, or at least a reference to it. They thought it was going to continue growing. Well, it is continuing to grow in an absolute sense, just not in relation to this addressable retail, which is not even a meaningful segment anymore. So part of the problem is using these charts that are viral as an analytics tool without understanding them. The second is that almost every business is going to need a mix or pick and choose between e-commerce, bricks and mortar, and delivery method. And they're going to have to pick and choose between how they get to their customers to come up with the optimal combination for them. And so this analysis is no longer valid, I guess, is the point of the ratio of one to the other.
I think the mixed comment is really important. And you see Shopify actually, who you mentioned, I think you said Spotify by mistake, but Shopify understands this, right? So they've rolled out Shopify point of sale in the last couple of years, and they're working with all of these sort of delivery mechanisms as well to sort of bring all of those pieces into the same platform, which fundamentally was pure e-commerce 4 or 5 years ago. And I don't think you could describe Shopify as that any longer. So I think that that's probably the way that a lot of these quote unquote e-commerce companies are thinking. And we're seeing Amazon, do the same thing with its acquisition of Whole Foods and now the acquisition of One Medical. And there's all these things that occur in the real world that Amazon is now sort of getting into as well. So
Pharmaceuticals.
Yeah.
I don't know if you got solicited by them last week for their new pharmacy service.
I did not, but
I did not.
I commented about it on Twitter after the CVS CEO said, "Oh, people really want to do this in real life," and I said, "Not me. I would much rather."
But that's not a. That wasn't a real thing. That wasn't a real thing. That's not a real thing. That was a kind of a tongue-in-cheek.
I see.
Thing.
Okay.
Yeah, if you'd sort of drilled into it, but so when I used to speak at conferences back when I was going to conferences, I would always point out. People like to talk about the growth of e-commerce, and I would always point out the opposite, which is, that at whatever point in history, X% was offline, right? But the larger point was the digital drove a lot of those offline purchases, right? It's not this sort of bright line where you've got pure offline shoppers and pure e-commerce shoppers. There was a lot of crossover behavior, and the point of sale was mostly offline. But digital was a huge component of that sale ultimately. And that was something that it took, as intuitive as that is, it took people a long, long time to kind of come to that. And mobile really, the iPhone was the thing that helped people kind of see that clearly. I think and as we discussed prior to this call, the e-commerce number has always been sort of about hyping growth and for investors, and it's been a kind of news hook, but it's the wrong discussion. And I think, Mike, as you're pointing out, the right one is, and David, the right one is, what are your customers doing? What's the right mix? And how are you accommodating them according to their shopping needs and desires? And every single business is now a digital business, 100%. If you're not a digital business, then you're going out of business at some point. I mean, there's probably some rare exceptions to that, but going forward, everybody has to be a digital business. And so this e-commerce versus traditional retail discussion is kind of is the wrong discussion to be having, I think, as you point out. We agree.
We agree.
Nothing more to say.
Nothing more to say. We've solved
the bid is off, and
well, so let's just the bid is gone. Let's talk just for a moment about cars, because I think cars are really interesting. That is a category that people would have never said you would buy online. A car, one of the biggest purchases people will ever make. Nobody's going to buy cars online. Well, obviously Tesla has proven that wrong, and subsequent to Tesla, other EV manufacturers that make you reserve cars online or, buy them online. Ford wants to sell 100% of their EVs online. And I think the way that cars are going to be sold in the future and houses were bought online, which is an incredible thing during the pandemic. So all of these preconceptions about what people will buy offline versus online are just out the window. But the two worlds are increasingly integrated and work together, and that's the larger point that everybody now should be. That should just be a given, I think.
Yeah, and the other piece on cars in particular is there's also now new models of buying cars, right? There are subscription plans where, okay, maybe I don't want to buy an $80,000 Volvo sight unseen, but I'd try it for a year at $600 a month, and if I didn't like it, I would turn it in. It becomes the barrier to entry sort of becomes dramatically lower when you don't have to fork over that kind of money all in one go. So,
or in the case of BMW, you can you can buy a subscription for a seat heater,
That's right.
and then probably have to, as part of that, give your data up that your butt was heated to somebody. I don't know who would be interested in it, but it seems like that would be that's like this. BMW literally proposed charging a monthly fee for seat heaters. Pretty bizarre. They're all looking to become Apple or Google or something.
Right.
Well, people have gone sort of
some
subscription
Bain
crazy.
consultant told them you have to increase your services revenue. So
yeah, this is one of the maddening things about, I think, cars in the future, especially kind of tech forward cars like EVs, is the idea that they're going to try and sneak all these subscription costs in there, and Tesla's kind of leading the way with that, and it's that would be a very, very annoying thing. I own old cars right now that don't have, so I'm not paying any subscriptions, and I really don't want to in the future.
But I owned a 2015 Toyota hybrid, and every time I booted it, it told me it was a Toyota hybrid. It's like every time I turned it on, it's like, I don't need that from the main screen. I know what car I have, right? So even pre-internet, they were annoying. Now they're going to get really annoying.
Right. Which goes back to the whole theme of connected cars and location data and other kinds of data and
Yes,
surveillance. But we'll leave that further discussion for.
I am fighting David for his tin hat here.
You are, but this is not entirely Google related. So
okay.
You can be president of the tinfoil chapter of another society. So yeah.
Thank you for the endorsement.
All right. Okay, so ends another delightful episode of the Near Memo, and we'll be back next week to spread more conspiracy theories about internet companies. Thanks for joining David, Mike, and Greg. To stay on top of the latest developments in local, subscribe to our newsletter at nearmedia.co. We'll see you next week.